Good morning. My name is Michelle Henry, and we are going to get started this morning, hoping that maybe more people will join us once they hear that we're starting. I'm a member of the Westminster Social Justice team. The Social Justice Forums are built around a common theme, and this program year, the theme is Building Solidarity Together, walking along all God's people, striving for a more just world, acting courageously to transform social systems and relationships. This morning, we are pleased to welcome Reverend Jerad Morey, Director of Strategic Partnership for the Minnesota Council of Churches, where he leads the council's respective conversation program. In mid-September of this year, former President Barack Obama introduced a new class of 205 emerging changemakers from Africa, Asian Pacific, Europe, and the United States as part of the Obama Foundation Leaders Program. Jerad was selected to join this group for his role leading, especially across differing viewpoints, to further the role of religious pluralism. This morning, he will provide us with an overview of how congregations host respectful conversations this year ahead of the general election, and he will offer us an opportunity to practice facilitated conversations designed not to change minds but to soften hearts. We are continuing to think about how Westminster could engage in respectful conversations later this program year. But first, a couple of logistics. You are all seated around tables here in person. We invite you to talk to each other. If you are attending by live stream, you will have an opportunity to join a breakout room via Zoom link, and we will post this in the live stream chat. If time allows, we will have time for questions and answers. Those attending in person in the Miser room, please raise your hands and we'll bring a microphone to you, including those on the live stream who can hear your questions or comments. For those attending via live stream, please submit your comments or questions in the live stream chat, and we'll monitor that and raise your questions and or comments. I think we move to the next slide here. So our commitment to social respectful conversations. Just have you read that for a minute. We are offering some guidelines to help us facilitate our own respectful conversations. I'd like you to read this briefly, and then we will move to Jerad's presentation. But first, before we get started, let us pray. Holy One, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness so we may honor the divine in all that and all people do. Amen. Now please welcome Reverend Jerad Morey.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning in a room some of you may know, I'll bet many of you don't though, that the very first MCC Respectful Conversation that was ever performed on film was in the basement of this very church. We were glad to be able to do it. If you ever watch PBS at 2 a.m., you might still sometimes come across the 7-minute clip that they made of the experience and maybe recognize somebody. Maybe yourself. Was anybody here at that one? No, that's fine. Well, again, I am Jerad Morey, Director of Strategic Relationships at the Minnesota Council of Churches. I want to applaud Westminster for your focus on solidarity. We are in a time when solidarity is desperately needed, and I think especially the week after an election, we are more reminded than ever in our different emotional responses to what happens, how far apart we can be, and how much closer we could be to each other. How much understanding there is an opportunity for us to develop in the spaces where we are. I am, in addition to that, one personal note. I'm a dad of a 9th grader and a 6th grader who go to the Mounds View schools. The 9th grader is passionate about his viola, and he's performing a prelude in our church this morning, which is being recorded, so I'll be able to see it, but he's very happy to be able to do so. what we're going to talk about today. We'll be working within our time limit. There's so much I want to tell you. I'm not going to tell you all of it because I want to make sure that you have a chance to interact with each other too. I'm going to talk about the importance of respectful conversations as a way to listen for solidarity. We'll talk about the principles to follow in a respectful conversation. You will have an experience of, I'm hoping, around 20-25 minutes to engage in respectful conversation. Then we'll talk about some of the impact of the conversations over these last 12 years, how we've impacted solidarity and improved listening, and hopefully have time for some Q&A. When we talk about the need for solidarity, part of really what I'm focusing on here is the challenge of polarization. How we are polarized to extremes in ways that make it hard for us to connect to each other across our divides. Polarization is a problem socially and publicly in a couple ways. One, because the more polarized we are against each other, the more we are prone to undemocratic, small d democratic behaviors. The more polarized we are to each other as Christians, the harder it is for us to love our opponent on whatever topic we feel like we have an opponent on. Polarization is something that separates us, that causes us to see the worst in the other, and oftentimes causes us to be the worst of ourselves when we feel it to an extreme. This is manifest in public health spaces. Did you know that when you have a conversation with somebody that challenges your worldview, you walk away from that conversation with what's called a negative other perspective and lower human regard. Now, negative other perspective means that that other person just dropped a couple steps in your own opinion of them, increasing the possibility that you may hold some contempt for them. Lower human regard means that your faith in humanity as a whole goes down. When your worldview is challenged, your faith in humanity as a whole goes down. This is according to research from Dr. Mark Brandt at Michigan State University. In addition to which, people who are themselves polarized outside the norm of their communities experience not just worse mental health outcomes, but 2 more days of poor physical health every month. Every month, the most polarized among us lose a weekend's worth of health every month. Not being in solidarity, not being able to build these bridges of listening with people who disagree with us, who are different from us in one way or another, genuinely causes us mental and physical harm. But solidarity, we can manifest both in social cohesion and in democracy. I'm going to quick skip ahead to see what I was going to say about this as I put down my coffee. So, social cohesion, when we talk about solidarity, we are talking about social cohesion. We're talking about promoting small d democratic norms and values. What does it mean to be an engaged person? What does it mean to be somebody who cares about peace and cares about getting along with each other? In academic literature, there are a couple key terms that have a bunch of survey questions associated with them. One is affective polarization. How intensely are you yourself polarized against those towards whom you disagree? And then bridging quotient. How equipped and confident and likely are you to be a peacemaker in future situations that might require peacemaking, that might require bridging across polarized divides? So when we talk about social cohesion, I'm talking about effective polarization and bridging quotient. How do we reduce your effective polarization, help you to love your enemy? How do we increase your bridging quotient, help you to be a better peacemaker? This is key to our democracy. We also talk about democratic norms, but I'm going to pass by this part because I can get in the weeds because I love it so much. When we started Respectful Conversations at Minnesota Council Churches in 2012, we had a goal of strengthening civic life in Minnesota by providing opportunities to people who wanted to pursue division through the lens of their own deeply held values. And it's gone pretty well. The way that we've done it is through fostering a practice of deep listening with structured, facilitated conversation. We have neutral hosts, focus on conversation, We presume that everybody participating in the conversation is themselves biased, and the goal of any of these conversations is not persuasion. It is not to change anybody's mind, but it is to soften everybody's heart. These are conversations designed not to change minds, but soften hearts. And it's based on some physiological principles. One, that we are hardwired as human beings for conflict, that a strongly offered opinion can trigger our limbic system, signaling danger. But that if we add structure to a conversation, that includes time to slow ourselves down, engage our brain, then our prefrontal cortex can calmly assimilate the information that we are receiving. By structuring for inquiry, changing how we speak, I'm going to pass by this because there's a cartoon I'd rather show you.
Today, everyone seems to have an opinion. We hear opinions expressed all around us. Talk radio, TV news channels, internet blogs. And the more these opinions are expressed, the less we seem to understand each other. The Respectful Conversations Project is different. At a respectful conversation, people are given the opportunity to express their opinion and listen to others in order to build empathy around a controversial issue. The idea is to understand what others think, not to change minds. So welcome to this respectful conversation. And in just a few moments, you'll have a chance to share your own thoughts. But first, some housekeeping. We all know how this works. This is a controversial issue. And 20 minutes from now, we can either be doing this, or we can be doing this. That's just sort of how human beings are. And that's why the folks in charge of this event are trying their best to create an environment that favors respectful conversations. There's actually some interesting science behind it. Did you know that when other people challenge our values, even just through words or opinions, the brain treats it very similarly to physical danger? We feel threatened, and that leads some of us to fight, some of us to run away, and some of us to freeze. The goal of this conversation is to not make anyone, no matter what they think about this issue, feel unsafe or threatened. The ground rules are pretty simple. No interrupting, try to listen, and if you find yourself getting upset, remember, today is about learning. It's not about winning or trying to defeat anyone. This is meant to be an opportunity to understand what others think. And if it gets to this, the opportunity is lost. Okay, enough cartoons.
Our thanks to PBS and David Gillette for that animation. What you'll be experiencing here is a taste of a respectful conversation. Not a real one. You don't have a trained table facilitator at your tables. You didn't have a meal before this. You didn't commit to 2.5 hours of your morning for this. But you're going to have a taste where we'll ask a couple of questions and you'll be encouraged at your tables to follow a structure that we've established. It consists of 2 rounds today for you. You'll have 2 rounds. Each round will have a question that you're asked. After you're asked the question, there will be a minute of silence as you reflect on your own response. After that minute of silence, each person at your table will have a minute to respond. I'm looking, is there a 6-person table here? Nope, okay, great. You'll have a minute to respond. Then there will be a second question following the same process, and then there will be a time for questions of genuine interest. Before we do any of the questions, we're going to talk about the agreements that we plan to follow. And we'll be having a respectful conversation about the election. Did you know that coming in? Did you know we talked about the election? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, well, so here's a good question then. The worst respectful conversation we had anywhere, ever, by far, was one where, first, the people who there were required by their boss to be there, and second, they were surprised by the topic. I don't want you to have a conversation where you are unprepared to engage, because if this is an involuntary topic for you, that'll be tougher. So, who would rather talk about something other than the election? Please raise your hand if you're not comfortable talking about the election, and we will create a separate table and we will develop a different topic at that table. Okay, please raise your hand if you are willing to engage with the other people at your table talking about the election. Okay, so from now on, I'm treating it as though you voluntarily came into a conversation where you knew what we'd be talking about, okay? All right. When we talk about a respectful conversation, the good news is this is not going to be a space where the question is, how did you vote? This is not going to be a space where, this is going to be a space where you engage in reflection and some of your own story sharing on your values and your perspectives. I'm not going to go into a lot of the logistics of how a larger conversation experience would work, but I do want to talk about the agreements that we will follow as part of the respectful conversation. And when I say I want to talk about it, I mean I want to show you another video.
Handy discussion tips from the Theater of Public Policy. Check it out.
We came to Huge Theater in Minneapolis to see how the Theater of Public Policy players practice respectful conversations. In order to have respectful conversations, it helps to have some agreements. We'll now see how people can exchange opinions in a respectful manner. For the purpose of this demonstration, we'll use a benign, somewhat silly topic, cake. How do you feel about cake?
Cake is awesome. Everybody with a brain knows that.
Obviously, this person is saying their opinion, but in a respectful conversation, we speak for ourselves. Let's try that again.
I think cake is awesome.
You only like cake because you've never tried pie. If you would just try pie, I know you would change your opinion.
This is not the place to debate or criticize other people's opinions. Be respectful of what other people have to say.
I think cake is awesome.
Oh, for me, it's pie. I think pie is awesome.
I think cake is awesome.
Now, I live down on Guntham Street, Warehouse District, nice area. I have a lot of friends down there who like a lot of different types of cake. In fact, I have this one neighbor. Not so much of a neighbor as that he just lives in my neighborhood. Basically, if I was standing on my roof, I could pick his house out of a crowd of houses. Anyways, he's got this daughter, smart girl, college girl. She loves chocolate cake. Think she's into marketing, actually. There's a lot of interesting ways you can think about marketing cakes.
Be respectful of time. Do your part to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak if they want.
I think cake is awesome.
Me and my neighbors love to eat cake together.
I think cake is awesome.
Did you... snakes? I think snakes are slimy and gross.
Listen carefully to what others are saying so you can understand their point of view. Don't just use that time to think of what you yourself are going to say.
I think cake is awesome.
All right, I hear what you're saying. You think cake is awesome.
I heard that Jim, you know, the vending machine guy, he's allergic to cake. I know. He pretends to like it, but he can't even eat the stuff. Scandalous.
Only speak for oneself. During and after these conversations, don't attach people's names or identities to particular ideas or opinions unless given permission first.
I know that some people are allergic to cake.
I think cake is awesome.
Oh, for me, it's pie. What about you? You haven't said anything. Don't you have an opinion?
Yeah, I haven't heard you speak all night. You gotta have an opinion on this.
Allow people to pass, or pass for the time being if they're not ready to speak.
I think cake is awesome.
Oh, for me, it's definitely pie.
Oh, I'm not ready to say anything right now.
Obviously, this was a very light-hearted take on a method we'll now use for a serious conversation.
All right, so to review those agreements, the first one is you'll speak for yourself. You're not going to share somebody else's story. You're not going to say, well, as a member of this group, you're not going to speak for this group. You're going to speak for yourself. Second is you will practice respect. Obviously, no name calling. That's been valued. I've seen it on your Q&A. You'll be listening actively, doodling if it helps you to listen, but maintaining eye contact when possible, listening to what other people at the table have to say, and not characterizing what they say in negative ways. You'll be brief. That'll be helped because we have a time limit in this space. But do be careful that when we get to a more free-flowing time, that no one person at the table dominates the conversation. We're going to listen carefully so that you don't hear people talking about, so that you're able to pay attention with your ears wide open to what other people at your table are sharing. We're going to respect confidentiality, which includes when we leave the conversation. If somebody says something that stirs you, that outrages you, that you really want to talk more about, get their permission before sharing anything they said with anybody else. Get their permission before sharing anything they said with anybody else. That's part of respecting confidentiality. You're able to have a better discussion at your table when you know that the discussion is going to stay at your table. And then allow people to pass, as you heard. Especially when so many folks might not have anticipated the topic this morning. It's okay if you don't have a response to a prompt right away. If a person does pass, then when the last person at the table has spoken, invite whoever passed to have another opportunity. If they still decline, that's fine. Nobody is under pressure to say and contribute to every space. So, having said those things, there will be 2 questions and then a time for questions of genuine interest at your tables, and we'll be encouraging the Zoom audience, hi online, to go into breakout groups of 5 each. I'm going to structure these questions to be 6 minutes each, which allows for a minute of silence and 5 1-minute responses. I'll be calling out the 1-minute periods when the next person should talk or when the first person should begin for the first 2 questions. All right? So, do you feel like well, first, let me go back to the ground rules slide. Can I get a show of hands if you feel that you understand and intend to follow the ground rules as stated here? Okay, now raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand before. Okay, so we've all made a sign of our intent to follow these rules. Speak for yourself, practice respect, be brief, listen carefully, respect confidentiality, allow people to pass. Your first question, you have 1 minute of silent reflection before I'll invite you in. You know what, there's one other logistical piece. Who talks first, right? Let's go with whoever, for those of us who are in the room, whoever's sitting closest to the windows at your table, that will be the person to begin this conversation. And then we'll flow clockwise from there. If you're online, let it be whoever's first name is closest to the beginning of the alphabet. All right? Now, I invite you to spend a minute reflecting on your own response. What in your faith, life experiences, and deeply held values informs your perspective on the election? Thank you for participating in this first round of questions. I think from the way that I need this amplification because your conversation is so rich and I feel like I cut people off every time I said something, you understand why sometimes this process is a 3-hour experience, right? But the important thing is now that you are able to articulate what you're sharing with a group of people who you might not know in advance where they're coming from, and you're able to hear the perspectives of other people whose backgrounds and life experiences you might already have inferred can be significantly different from your own. Our second question, and again, you'll have 1 minute of reflection before we engage in a response, is what are your hopes and fears about the election? What are your hopes and fears about the election? When we begin on this one, we'll go starting this time with whoever's closest to the door in the room, or I know reverse alphabetical order can be hard online, so for you guys, let's do alphabetical order again, but this time start with the letter N. All right? So that's That's how it'll be first for online. For in-person, it'll be the door closest to the room, or the seat closest to the door. But first, 1 minute to reflect. What are your hopes and fears about the election? First 1 minute to reflect. Having completed that response, and I'm sure there are many people who feel like they did not have enough time, for some of you that might be good news to hear that this next portion we're moving into is questions of genuine interest. This is a less structured space. This is, what did somebody say that made you curious? What did you hear that you wanted to learn more about? Maybe it was just, I was really caught on that anecdote, and then that guy up front said you had to shut up. Can you say more about that? Whatever it might be. Is there something that you heard that you'd like to ask somebody at your table? You can ask and answer at your table. Oftentimes, we might give this 30 minutes, but this is a forum, and you've got places to be too, so this will be a 5-minute period of questions of genuine interest. Ask away. And thank you for that robust conversation that has been happening and that may still be happening at your tables. One of the things that you may find is that there's still things that you're curious about. Maybe there's things you're curious about people whose names you didn't even know until you were at the table together today, in which case that's a beautiful community strengthening experience that you just had. The opportunities that you have for ongoing relationship do not end, as you are all members of the same part of the body of Christ, and I do hope that if there were things that led you into further inquiry with each other, that you do pursue those inquiries outside of this time as you find more ways to connect with each other. That is a big chunk of being in solidarity. I have a few, I want to give you all the time for questions that you need, but I know we also have a hard stop in 8 minutes, so I'm going to speed through a couple pieces here. How did it work? How did it feel for you? Give me a thumbs up if it was good. Give me a thumbs sideways if you don't know. Give me a thumbs down if you'd have rather not done it. All right, I see a lot of vertical pointing upwards thumbs. That's great. We're pointing up to God who gave us the idea to do this in the first place, so that's great. At this point, we've been doing conversations like this, only more structured and facilitated for a dozen years, 350 events on large scales with over 8,500 Minnesotans all across the state on a wide variety of topics. We evaluate not according to whether people change their minds, but whether they soften their hearts. We've done evaluations in a traditional way for the conversations largely, but when it comes to strengthening solidarity, it's a new way that we're evaluating in partnership with Michigan State and Stanford University that I'd really like to highlight that demonstrates before a person has a respectful conversation, after they have a conversation. So an experience like what you had in small form, only expanded to about 2.5 hours, including a meal. All of the bold colors were statistically significant results, statistically significant outcomes of a conversation that we held on, this was on a college campus last year, but all of our evaluations over the last year have looked like this in terms of the impact of before and after on how people understand, how the positive feelings towards people who disagree. You see that on the far end of the spectrum. 68% improved. This means that the most statistically significant result was this notable improvement in how positively you feel towards those with whom you disagree. You remember how in the beginning we named polarization as a negative impact on mental and physical health. Increasing your positive regard for those who you don't quite understand, whose worldviews are different from yours, is improving your own mental health, improving your own physical health. And being listened to by them improves their mental health and their physical health. It is by opening your ears in a spirit of curiosity and generosity that you are able to act as a healer of the ills of polarization, and in so doing move us all into a healthier society. However we feel now, you have the agency to do that, and you just had some practice in it. We got all kinds of wonderful things people have said about the process before. but you've got a hard stop, and I want to make sure that you have a chance. I'll leave this slide up. First, I'll leave this slide up. Hi, I've been Jerad Morey, but I would like to take your questions if you have any questions or reflections on what you've experienced this morning.
Your first question asking us if we knew about the topic, I just wanted to say that we didn't know, but we probably weren't surprised that that was the topic. So it wasn't that blindsided. So that's maybe why we were all okay with going ahead.
Great, thank you. So reasonable expectation of the topic, even if not explicitly understood. Any other questions or reflections on the experience?
Despite not knowing the topic, this felt, because it's this place, a safe place to have this conversation about the election. I'm wondering how it would have gone elsewhere.
Thank you for asking. One of the things that had us offering these in the first place, after the first year we did them, our first year it was focused on the amendment defining marriage in Minnesota. And we evaluate our surveys. We ask, do you have more empathy for those with whom you disagree on the topic? We saw that in urban, suburban, exurban, rural congregations, we spread them out. About 55% of people in urban communities had more empathy. 75 to 80% in rural communities had more empathy. That's because, I don't know if you were here in Minnesota in 2012, but in urban communities, there was more of a stigma around supporting the amendment. If you lived in the city, you might not necessarily want your friends and neighbors to know that you supported the idea of marriage as between one man and one woman. So fewer people came to those. In rural communities, there was less of a stigma, so there was more diversity of perspective present in those, and our empathy numbers shot up when there was more diversity of perspective. So that made us think that this is like one of those science fiction force fields that gets stronger the harder you push against it. The more ideological diversity is present, the more effective it is.
This is kind of a follow-up to what you just said. I sense that a lot of us in this room all feel the exact same way and are thinking very similar things. And I would really like to be in a room with people that don't think exactly like us.
Desire to be in a room with people who don't, yep, that is a wonderful desire. There's this whole movement. A word of hope. There are hundreds of organizations. They haven't all been doing it as long as the Minnesota Council of Churches has. A lot of them are new in the last 4 years, but hundreds of groups who are engaged in all sorts of different aspects of peace building and bridging work. One of the focuses of a membership group that we're part of, the Bridging Movements Alignment Council, is how do you talk about bridging in a way that attracts people who lean ideologically red. So there's specific language that we incorporate in our press releases and news announcements about these, designed to attract others. We had one in Plymouth just in August, and the folks organizing that one made a point of inviting explicit representatives of the disagreeing parties to be present in that space. So through invitation and the solicitation of relationship, it totally can happen. Yeah, there were, I checked on the evaluations that I saw, there were at least 2 tables that were very appreciative of the diversity of perspective that they had.
We have time just for one more question.
So I've been really struggling with knowing that the divide and conquer strategy has been very effective in our country and how to not play into it. And what you're doing is obviously completely addressing that. So my question is, how can we get involved in helping this happen in some way?
Thank you very much for asking. The way that these predominantly happen right now is we hold a large-scale respectful conversation event in partnership with a congregation or a campus or a municipality. If you're a member of a community that is experiencing conflict or that wants to inoculate itself against future conflict, then do talk to me about organizing one in your space. We also occasionally have some that in a full experience like this, you would have a table facilitator, and we have trainings for table facilitators on occasion. We just had one in St. Cloud where 8 trained table facilitators from all across Minnesota, from Cloquet down to Burnsville, drove into St. Cloud to help buttress a conversation that was taking place there. You might have read about that in a Karen Tolkien article in the Star Tribune 3 weeks ago. It was great. But yeah, so there's get in touch with me, and I'm happy to help you figure out a way to plug in. And my email address is up here, and the Council of Churches general phone number is up there. You can call that number and ask for Jerad Morey. Thank you for your time.
We also had in the Faith in Action newsletter, and we'll put it back, that we were looking for Westminster people who wanted to do this. So we'll put it back, because we can do this. We've done it before.
Well, thank you, Jerad, for sharing your perspectives and insights. Next Sunday, we will welcome a panel of 5 of the Westminster Annual Community Partners sharing their work, supporting and advocating for affordable housing, serving neighbors experience homelessness here in the Twin Cities. We look forward to seeing them.
Thank you. And I'm not in a hurry, so I'll hang out if anybody wants to talk more.